A good underwater predator must know how to remain motionless, to be unseen, to conceal his intentions, and wait for the right moment to strike, neither too soon nor too late. Then let his prey exhaust itself before bringing it to the surface. In a Siberian lake, Vladimir Putin indulges in one of his favorite pastimes. In this summer of 2017, the president of Russia gained his revenge. His shadow is omnipresent in Syria, Ukraine, and elsewhere. He manipulates the political life of Western democracies. He has managed to influence the presidential elections of his American enemy. To restore Russia's lost power, Putin has drawn the West into a new Cold War. Here is the story of this head-to-head with its clashes and manipulations. This is primarily a tale of revenge, the story of an outcast making his comeback, at the head of a country also making a comeback. The year is 2012. Vladimir Putin has been re-elected president for a new 6-year term. For 12 years now, the former KGB agent has reigned over all Russia. In 12 years, he has restored order to a country that was threatened with collapse, muzzled the opposition, and reined in the media. Yet the pomp and the ceremony masks the reality, that he is as weak as ever. For months, all over the country, the largest crowds of demonstrators since the fall of the Soviet Union have been denouncing rigged elections and demanding that Putin stand down. The fall in oil prices has triggered an explosion of poverty, making corruption intolerable. Putin, it is claimed, is now one of the world's wealthiest men. Holed up in his palace, the master of the Kremlin is becoming increasingly alarmed. So, he counterattacks, using a tried and tested method. He describes a conspiracy hatched by the West, the United States and the CIA.
And we do have serious concerns about the conduct of the elections. Russian voters deserve a full investigation of all credible reports of electoral fraud and manipulation. And we hope in particular...
Like all Russians, he hears the words of the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, on TV on the evening news. He interprets them as a declaration of war.
Она задала тон некоторым нашим деятелям внутри страны, дала сигнал. Они этот сигнал услышали и при поддержке Госдепа США начали активную работу.
To maintain his position and mobilize his people, Putin seeks to reclaim Russia's status as a world power, one that it lost 20 years earlier after the fall of the Soviet Union, defeated by the West. Preparing to fight this battle, he reorganizes his government. He excludes liberals and surrounds himself with hardliners. Many of them, like him, have Secret Service backgrounds. Others are faithful oligarchs. Vladimir Yakunin, a friend, former KGB officer, extremely wealthy businessman and fervent believer, becomes a member of the inner circle informally advising the Russian president.
With the dissolution of the Soviet system, it seemed that there were no any ground for more ideological struggle. When somebody decides that he possesses the only truth, which is truth to everyone, that is domination. And that can lead to actual era of new war, whatever, ideological war or Cold War, whatever.
Naturally, this new Cold War targets the winner of the previous struggle, America, and its military wing in Europe, NATO. Since the fall of the USSR in 1991, the Atlantic Alliance has gained a foothold at the gates of Russia in what used to be Soviet territory. Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states, previously under Soviet occupation, have sought its protection. The time for military maneuvers has come. Putin's nationalist discourses are worrying Russia's neighbours. Across Eastern Europe, the United States plans to deploy an anti-missile shield, a new weapon at the cutting edge of technology. Putin sees this as an intolerable challenge to his new desire for power. He decides to confront the West in Mexico, on the occasion of the G20 summit, an annual event where heads of state gather. Behind the scenes, these summits are an opportunity for leaders to size each other up, negotiate, and make shows of strength. It is the modern equivalent of the medieval jousting fields on which lords would confront one another.
His desire is to create a new balance of power, even if it is not necessarily in his favor. What obsesses him at this precise moment, and which will be at the focus of our interview, is the anti-missile defense that the USA is setting up in Eastern Europe, which he regards as a hostile act.
This is military and political system of the Western world. From this point of view, if the threat of communism disappeared, the simple question is, why? Why NATO is growing?
I try to make him understand that the missile defense is not directed against Russia. It is designed to protect Europe from any possible attack from Iran, which seems to be the most serious threat. He acts as if he is not fully convinced and tries to demonstrate using drawings that the missile defense is, in fact, aimed at Russia.
Putin knows that Iran is but a pretext, but he hopes to be heard by the real leader of NATO, whom he is meeting for the first time on the international scene. Indeed, Barack Obama has always shown a desire for appeasement in dealing with Russia.
It was a tense meeting. It was not warm in any way. Putin lectured President Obama at length about all the misdeeds of the United States over the years, going back to the Clinton administration and NATO enlargement.
President Obama always engaged Mr. Putin in a spirit of logic. And the logic that we saw in the relationship was not necessarily the same logic that Mr. Putin saw.
When somebody is trying to assure you, listen, I come with my tanks, I come with my, military equipment to your backyard, but be calm. That is not against you. Would you believe?
And then there was also, I think, a geopolitical argument that the West should take advantage of this time to move east and to make sure that Poland and Hungary and Estonia are forever outside Russia's sphere of influence. Free states should be able to say, we're in NATO, we're not in NATO, we're in the EU, we're not in the EU. Who is Russia to tell them how they should behave?
Henceforth, the anti-missile shield in Eastern Europe is non-negotiable, Obama tells him. The press conference is icy.
Мы поговорили и о международных проблемах.
We have also discussed international affairs.
All interested parties in trying.
Basically, Obama seriously doubts how much clout Putin really has as head of a country with a GDP equal to that of Spain. The meeting between the two men ends on a disagreement.
Thank you, everybody. They did not consider Russia the equal partner. Good, not that good, but equal. That way of behavior was a clear sign of the feeling of superiority. Kind of, body language to show, listen, you are not like me, so behave.
I did not feel that there was a good personal relationship between President Obama and Vladimir Putin. That for some reason, that relationship was strained. And the result was that I think in part it contributed to a breakdown in the relationship between our two countries.
Putin senses disdain from Obama. A small detail, but an important one in Putin's eyes, is that the US president does not attempt to speak a single word in Russian, while he manages to throw in a little English.
If I know 2 words in Chinese, or maybe in German, in my negotiations, I will find a proper place to use this knowledge, to show my respect.
Humiliation is undoubtedly the psychological thread running through this standoff. Humiliation that stems from the feeling that the fall of the USSR was set up by the West, almost overlooking the fact that the USSR was collapsing under the weight of its own inefficiency.
Putin is very Russian. There's a big inferiority complex about how the West doesn't take us seriously. They see us as the kind of retarded little brother that they can just kick and insult all the time. They had been a great power that was on par with the US, that was calling the shots all over the world, and now people don't even listen to them.
Not only is the West not listening, it is advancing its pawns everywhere. In Syria, in this summer of 2012, an old ally of Russia, Bashar al-Assad, is facing an uprising. His opponents are armed by Europe and the United States. Putin is in no doubt that the West is forcing a regime change, just as it did in Iraq in 2003 and in Libya, where Gaddafi has just been assassinated.
When Vladimir Putin got a hold of the video of Gaddafi being killed, lynched in the streets, he watched that video on repeat. He just watched over and over and over again. And apparently he did the same thing with the video of Saddam Hussein's execution. I think he takes these things very personally.
I think Putin was watching it to understand that should someone stand up to the United States, should there be a real fight, real confrontation, one should expect no mercy.
For Putin, the Arab Spring bears an uncanny resemblance to the street demonstrations against his rule a few months earlier. So to stem the Western advances in Syria, he supports, at arm's length, a regime on the verge of collapse.
Russian Federation.
2 years later, in Sochi, Putin oversees the lavish opening ceremony of the Winter Olympic Games, which he is determined will be a show of strength.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, дорогие друзья.
Your Excellency, gentlemen, dear friends.
Among the heads of state at the gala dinner is one of his historic allies, the leader of a former Soviet republic, President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. Ukraine, with its 45 million inhabitants, occupies a strategic position between Europe and Russia.
For millions of peoples of the world.
But Putin is concerned about the serious problems facing the Ukrainian president. In the capital, Kiev, the people are revolting against their leader, seen as corrupt and enthralled to Moscow. The crowd is clamoring for reconciliation with the European Union. To make matters worse, the Americans are here. An Obama advisor comes in person to distribute food to government opponents in Independence Square. As far as Putin is concerned, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States promised to never integrate Ukraine into the Western camp.
We had a coup d'etat, a state coup in Kiev. Some people would prefer to interpret it as a kind of a reaction of the whole population of Ukraine against corrupted authorities. And this is a false description.
On February 15th, things begin to heat up. Russia's national hockey team faces a crucial match against the United States. In Ukraine, the government flexes its muscles against the pro-Western opposition. It's a nightmare for Putin, who fears the country is falling into the pocket of NATO, which would then be a mere 500 kilometers away from Moscow's door. The United States go on to win the match in a penalty shootout, much to the anger of the Russian president. He urgently summons his Security Council. His plan is to invade Crimea in Ukrainian territory. This Russian-populated peninsula is home to a Russian naval base. But a military invasion in Europe is not a decision to be taken lightly. Putin consults his advisors and ponders his next move. In the inner circle of power, some hardliners urge him to go on the offensive, such as Konstantin Malufiev, an oligarch of the younger generation, an ultranationalist high priest of Russian Christianity.
That was his decision. And I can, again, just to tell you what I heard, that it was not easy. And of course, that was debated and realized there what would happen after and what would be the reaction from the West, from Americans who sponsored this junta in Kiev. And of course, their reaction was obvious.
До свидания, Сочи!
Gambling that Obama dare not confront him, Putin gives the green light.
During the entire period of the Sochi Olympics, Vladimir Putin was relatively unobtrusive.
On February 23rd, he closes the Olympic Games and, in the early morning of February 26th, Crimea wakes up in the hands of the Russian special forces that landed in the night. One sovereign state, Ukraine, is invaded by another, Russia.
We were surprised when he went into Crimea. We saw that this was a potential, but it was a surprise that he did it in the way he did.
His goal is to keep Ukraine destabilized and to make sure that it never completes any kind of Western orientation.
He's not, as we like to think of him, especially here in the U.S., a grand strategic thinker and chess player. He plays blackjack. You know, it's a very high acceptance of risk. And that's a very Russian mentality. There's a Russian word called avos, which is like, basically, I'll wing it and see what happens.
Obama calls Putin. For over an hour, he threatens him with extremely heavy sanctions should he venture any further into Crimea.
What I remember most about those conversations is President Obama speaking very matter-of-factly to President Putin and saying Russia's actions are unacceptable. We need to restore Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
But ignoring Western threats, Putin goes even further. In the summer of 2014 in Donbass, an eastern region of Ukraine, Russian troops without uniforms arrived to support the separatist pro-Russian rebels fighting the new government in Kiev. A dirty war begins.
What did they want? 500 miles from Moscow. They wanted us to stay and see how they would kill our people there. So we have to protect ourselves. And it means that to protect our interests near our borders.
Suspected by the West of financing separatists, Malofeev is subject to sanctions. For Putin and his fellow countrymen, the war is not without cost.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Начнем с ситуации вокруг Украины, вокруг Крыма.
About 50 members of his inner circle are denied the right to travel and have their overseas assets frozen. Severe sanctions applied by Europe and America affect oil exports, the banking system and armaments.
Сергей Викторович, что по этому поводу могли бы нам сказать и проинформировать о чем?
Президент Обама объявил о новых санкциях, которые касаются примерно 20, опять же, физических лиц и одного финансового учреждения Банка России.
Сколько физических лиц?
Около 20. Кроме этого, наши украинские соседи...
Let's play to our advantage. Let's play to our strong suit. What is our strong suit? It's the economy. It is not the balance of power in eastern Ukraine. Because on the economy, the West, the EU plus the US together are 50% of global GDP. Russia is a few percentage points.
In February 2015 in Minsk, Putin finally negotiates a ceasefire with the West. Master of a conflict that he personally orchestrated, he has ensured that Ukraine will not join NATO or the European Union anytime soon. But at what price? May 2015, the extravagant celebrations to mark the 70th anniversary of the victory against Nazism is a mere facade. Sanctions are hitting the economy hard. The ruble is collapsing, and even the military budget will have to be reduced. The Russian people were promised glory and are now paying for it. Prices are soaring and poverty is on the increase. But Putin remains deaf to the concerns of the business sector. What worries him most is being a pariah at the head of an ostracized state. In a crushing humiliation, Western leaders refuse to attend this important anniversary. Worse, the man who wanted to restore Russia's global standing is excluded from the G8 summit, where the world's great powers assemble.
I think not being invited to the G8 affected him, maybe even more than the economic sanctions.
He fancied himself a great world leader. When he was denied a platform around the world, and when people wouldn't meet with him, I think that had an impact.
When it came to Obama and to some extent Merkel and others, the tables were turned. He was boxed out. He wanted recognition. He wanted to come in the meetings. He wanted phone calls, and he wasn't getting them.
So Putin, as a reminder that he at least still has a powerful army, is reduced to provocations. For the first time since the Cold War, Russian jets threaten American ships in the Baltic. In response, he receives only disdain from the leader of the world's leading power.
Russia is a regional power that is threatening some of its immediate neighbors, not out of strength, but out of weakness.
Is he crazy? You know, is he play basketball too much? You know, does he look at globe? Does he read anything in the history about Stalingrad? You know, he really believes that we are regional power?
We are the only power in the world which has equal nuclear power, military power, to the United States of America. At least it would be wise, even if you think so, don't tell it.
Вы меня спросили, там, ваш покорный слуга, друг или не друг? Я не друг, и не невеста, и не жених. Я президент Российской Федерации. 146 миллионов человек. У этих людей есть свои интересы, и я обязан их отстаивать.
In late summer 2015, in his luxurious villa by the Black Sea, Putin suddenly presents a more serene face. In his attempts to break free of the banishment imposed upon him by the West, he now realizes that confrontation is an ineffective strategy. He has a plan. The time for revenge is nigh. It will exceed his expectations.
Товарищ Верховный Главнокомандующий, в соответствии с вашим распоряжением, боевая авиация наших вооруженных сил...
First, he returns to center stage thanks to a bold move in Syria. He orders a mass intervention in support of the Bashar al-Assad regime. For a period of many months, hundreds of aircraft are sent to bomb opponents and quell any rebellion. Taken by surprise, the West opts not to obstruct Putin, but has ulterior motives.
Our calculation was that Russia risked being in a situation where it was stuck, like Afghanistan, where over time it would have to spend more and more resources to prop up Assad. And thus far, Russia has not become, unfortunately, exhausted by its intervention in Syria.
Russia will not become bogged down in Syria. On the contrary. Its intervention allows the Assad regime to quash the rebellion. As well as a war, Putin is waging a propaganda battle. Which is why the following year, in May 2016, he appears in a grandiose TV spectacle to celebrate his first great victory against ISIS, taking back the famous archaeological site of Palmyra.
Надежды не только на возрождение Пальмира как достояние всего человечества, но и на избавление современной цивилизации от этой страшной заразы, от международного терроризма. Большое вам всем за это спасибо.
In reality, Putin is fighting ISIS less vigorously than the more moderate opposition. By posing a bulwark against terrorism, Putin is primarily addressing public opinion. His hope is that, traumatized by the attacks, many Westerners will be taken in by his belligerent posturing.
It's what you might call his communication logic. Look, it was me, Vladimir Putin, who was the clear-headed one in all of this. And it is Russia that will eradicate ISIS.
Russia became to be the only solid rock in all this chaos. That's why, different people, different countries start to look at Russia as we call this, the keeper, peacekeeper.
The Syrian operation showed Putin the importance and impact of communication. When your military budget is only 1/10 of the United States, it is the weapon of the weak par excellence. So he asks his new chief of staff, General Gerasimov, for a new military doctrine.
Товарищ Верховный позвольте поблагодарить вас за оказанное высокое доверие и буду делать все от меня зависящее для достижения этой цели. С 2010 по 2012.
This will be the Gerasimov doctrine, a hybrid war in which subversion, espionage, propaganda and cyber attacks shape the opponent's political and social landscape.
The most important one, I think, is information, because it never stops. Information warfare is 24/7. It never stops. And in that information warfare, the West, primarily the United States, have been designated an adversary or even an enemy.
Putin does not watch television. He is wary of the internet, receives information on paper. Yet this former KGB officer, trained under Brezhnev, knows how to use the most modern technologies.
Такое ощущение, что это какая-то компьютерная игра. Давай, давай, давай. Снаряд. Он не разорвался. Вот детонатор.
In front of specially invited guests, he celebrates the success of the state television channel he has set up to propagate Russian ideas in the world.
Телеканал Russia Today доступен сейчас для 700 миллионов зрителей. И сегодня, когда ситуация в мировой политике, прямо скажем, сложна, как никогда важно, чтобы ваш и наш голос, вашу и нашу позицию слышали.
Like missiles and pipelines, Russia Today, RT, is regarded by the state as a strategic tool with a guaranteed budget. RT is broadcast in 5 languages in 100 countries. On the internet, the heart of Putin's strategy, RT videos garner more hits than those of CNN and the BBC.
We just want the competition for people's mind back. We want, the winners in Cold War, do not be so lazy.
The United States are, of course, a priority target. Around the world, these are RT's largest offices.
Well, a new report shows viewers are leaving the mainstream media by the drove. So it looks like people are turning elsewhere to get their news.
For example, a couple days after I had started, there was a protest movement here called Occupy Wall Street. And they had covered that. We covered it, actually, extensively.
Police brutality running wild in New York.
We blew it out of proportion, and now I realize why. It's their dream to see Americans protest and Americans themselves voicing their distrust of the system of American democracy and capitalism, and Americans themselves saying that the system isn't working.
Since President Obama took office, the country has seen the largest rise of people on food stamps ever.
Here in D.C., because we are out here struggling.
My name is Daniel Bushell. Top officials say the White House is behind the terrorism of their population and new evidence from 9/11.
There were a lot of conspiracy theories. That was a big part of the strategy. They tried to kind of hijack existing problems in the U.S., existing divisions.
Putin understands that public opinion is the weak point of Western democracies. In early summer 2016, it is something he is acutely aware of when Obama's Secretary of State visits him in the Kremlin.
Well, Mr. President, we're very appreciative for the opportunity to have a serious conversation about serious issues.
John Kerry dampens any hopes of sanctions being lifted unless Putin changes his policies in Ukraine and Syria. Worse, plans for another bank of anti-missile bases on Russia's borders have been announced. More worryingly, 6 months hence, he may be dealing with someone even more inflexible. The person he publicly accused of having given the nod to his opponents in 2011, his pet hate, Hillary Clinton, the clear front-runner in the forthcoming US election.
He's a very arrogant person to deal with.
Like many bullies, he is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can.
Russia is trying to move the boundaries of the post-World War II Europe. We've got to get NATO back working for the common defense.
Watching the race, Putin is surprised to see an outsider emerge, a populist who criticizes NATO and expresses admiration for Russia.
You know, Hillary likes to play tough with Russia. Putin looks at her and he laughs, okay? He laughs. Russia doesn't like ISIS any better than we do. Wouldn't it be nice if we actually got along with Russia and you could knock them out together? Wouldn't that be a good thing?
The choice for us was between maniac, who is Clinton, mad witch, and hooligan, who is Trump. Whom you would prefer to meet at the street, maniac or hooligan? Hooligan, of course, because with hooligan you have a chance. And with maniac there is no chance.
The thing she was advocating was a no-fly zone in Syria. To me, that was an invitation to a shooting match between the U.S. forces and the Russian forces in Syria.
Because Clinton was so Russophobic and so trained in this neoconservative style that I am now the leader of the global world and I have a rival province called Russia who is, doing something wrong. Of course we preferred Trump.
A form of hybrid war is launched against Hillary Clinton. Russian hackers pretending to be Americans produce over 1 million tweets hostile to the Democratic candidate. For weeks, their Facebook messages are propagated among 126 million internet users. The pro-Russian media spread rumors and fake news.
So in 2015, 96% of the Clintons' charity went to themselves. The rest of their charitable donations...
This video alone is seen by 9 million Americans on social networks.
Same year, that same charity made a $700,000 donation.
We are so much surprised to see how frightened the so-called West became receiving just one single alternative channel from the East and from Russia. Again, it confirms that the West is unfortunately much weaker than it tries to present itself.
Putin forces home his advantage. What the KGB called active measures are now implemented. The Trump team is approached. In all, a dozen advisors or members of the candidate's inner circle. US intelligence agents are facing an unthinkable scenario.
In any what they call active measures, we would call covert action in the United States, efforts to influence an election or to influence the way a foreign government acts, is going to involve a human element. So I can say with almost certainty that Russians would be looking for people We've seen information around the edges that suggests that perhaps some people around the Trump team had been engaging with the Russians. The notion that, hey, we can help you with information that we have on Hillary Clinton and your political opponents if in turn you take the idea of Ukraine off the agenda. In other words, we can make a deal here.
In late August 2016, 3 months before the election, Putin's hybrid war reaches a critical point. Hackers hijacked the Clinton team's computers to steal compromising emails. Voting machines are also targeted. The very heart of American democracy is under attack. This time, US intelligence has no doubt as to where the attack is coming from.
Our intelligence community was able to conclude that there was a serious effort underway by Russia to interfere with the election.
They say that Vladimir Putin directed an information operation against the United States elections, and that his goal was first to weaken American democracy, to get us to fight amongst ourselves, and second, to increase the chances of Donald Trump and decrease Hillary Clinton's chances.
The most important engagements, I think, with the Russians on the subject, first were the CIA director, John Brennan, with his counterpart in August, telling him what we were seeing, what was happening.
The Obama administration, however, is helpless to prevent this unprecedented attack. How to fight back? A plan to launch cyber attacks against Russian infrastructures is considered.
We spent a lot of time on to decide whether there should be some price paid for what they'd already done, some punishment. That last piece we thought could wait, and we could work on it and think about it. The most important thing was to get them to stop and prevent them from doing it again.
The White House decides to handle the case in complete secrecy.
Because we thought the main Russian objective was to create doubt and accelerate a crisis of credibility and legitimacy about our institutions, we had to be very careful in how we talked about this in public. Because even if we had said, and the president had said, this is what they're trying to do, but they won't succeed, it still might have created the very doubt Russia was trying to sow.
They thought that Hillary Clinton would win under any circumstances. They didn't want to develop a whole new political issue.
Classically Obama. You know, it was paralysis by analysis. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it. Let's get it just right. You know, it's the exact opposite of Putin, who doesn't consider all the strategic implications. They want to consider every possible angle, every possible repercussion. There were a lot of lawyers in the room to make sure they didn't break any laws.
On September 5th, 2016, Obama takes the opportunity afforded by a long-scheduled G20 gathering in China to collar Putin and spell things out to him.
Where the president was very direct and very clear with Mr. Putin that we knew what they were doing, it had to stop, and if it didn't, there would be consequences.
Nobody, neither Mr. Obama nor any security service in the world has ever provided us with any kind of evidence of Russian interference. Blah, blah, blah. We know that you have interfered.
It's very difficult to deal with someone who, again, lies on a regular basis.
He's a former KGB officer. I think intelligence officers around the world have a very similar way of looking at the world. There's a bar at our training facility that has sort of a funny phrase up above the bar, and it says, admit nothing, deny everything, make counter-accusations.
So there were so many very sensitive, very delicate issues which could have damaged the election campaign of Madame Clinton that some genius in her administration invented this way out, blaming Russia for meddling.
Everything we saw after that suggested that, as far as we could tell, Russian efforts to exfiltrate information and then turn around and use it in some fashion seemed to stop. But at that point, it was actually too late because they had given it to third parties, and those parties could put out the information whenever it was convenient for months and months to follow.
This third party is the WikiLeaks website. On October 7th, 2016, 1 month before the US election, the CIA finally goes public about Russian interference.
The Russian government has engaged in espionage against Americans.
Over the next few hours, WikiLeaks releases hacked emails from Hillary Clinton's team, significantly weakening the candidate.
To run for the presidency. She has no idea whether it's Russia, China, or anybody else.
I am not quoting myself.
No idea.
Президент Российской Федерации Владимир Владимирович Путин.
In this tight election, where every vote counts, the many months of Russian interference weigh heavy on the result.
Хочу поздравить американский народ с завершением избирательного цикла. Господина Дональда Трампа с победой на этих выборах, которые были направлены на восстановление отношений между Россией и Соединенными Штатами.
The former lieutenant colonel of the KGB has struck a brilliant blow. He has influenced an American election and even appears to be a godfather figure to the man who is now president of the world's leading power. For Putin, revenge is sweet. The period during the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Americans could bend his predecessor Boris Yeltsin to their will, seems a very long time ago. But he still has to get what he wants from the newly elected president. First, the lifting of sanctions affecting his country, but also an end to NATO expansion. In July 2017, he finally meets Donald Trump.
Nice to be with you.
At last, on an equal footing with an American president.
Just hearing about it.
This tete-a-tete, which he believes will be decisive, has been carefully negotiated with the American team.
Just a second.
Russian protocol insisted for a longer time of tete-a-tete meeting. President Putin called himself a master of human relations.
Putin was hoping to establish some kind of personal chemistry. You see Trump, if you meet with him one-on-one, if you're able to give him the impression that you click with him, that you understand him, that you think he's, brilliant, if you flatter him, he'll give you what you want.
The Americans insisted on shorter time of tete-a-tete meeting.
Thank you.
That would give you a key why their meeting in Hamburg was interrupted, because nobody wanted President Putin, to talk tete-a-tete. So that was their point.
Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Putin must face facts. Trump cannot commit to anything and remains evasive in all matters.
He is kind of being bandaged, if you know what I mean. And he cannot do what he promised to do.
No agreements were reached, and we are still far, far away from each other, and I believe that we lose time.
In his desire to harm Hillary Clinton, Putin did not plan on finding himself faced with a weakened president and an America more hostile than ever. Trump has his hands tied, threatened by investigations into his relations with Russia. Instead of sanctions being lifted, they are intensified by a Congress furious at Russian interference.
But we're talking about a foreign government that, using technical intrusion and lots of other methods, tried to shape the way we think, we vote, we act. That is a big deal.
I remain shocked that President Putin took that kind of a risky action because he is a risk taker. We've seen him take risks. But it's another thing to pick on the United States. And we have not finished responding. He has to know. He has to see. We have multiple investigations ongoing of what Russia did. This is not just about Trump and Russia. This is about Russia. If you're Vladimir Putin, I wouldn't sleep, I wouldn't rest easy because he doesn't know where this will end up.
But Putin does not stop there. In the wake of his US operation, he is suspected of trying to influence the French presidential elections in the spring of 2017, as well as the Brexit referendum.
You know, I think that Putin is a very complicated mix of someone who is tactically quite shrewd, but at the same time, he is caught up in his own rhetoric. In the long run, is this a win for Russia? That it's isolated? That it faces economic sanctions?
It is the price to be paid for his revenge on the West. For the time being, it allows him to maintain his grip on Russia. But where will his desire for retribution take us? Just how far will Putin go?
Мы будем всегда беречь Россию, как это делали вы, солдаты Победы. Российский солдат и сегодня, как во все времена,